Good morning. This is the BLAINESWORLD podcast that can be found each week on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. You can also listen in on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You get more information at our website, which is www.blainesworld.net. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, in my Zoom studio in lovely downtown Fairview, North Carolina. And each week we focus on positive news and information about people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And toward that end, it's my pleasure to introduce David Novak, the artistic director of A Telling Experience. And David, you can wave to all your fans and friends who might be watching this. So,
hi,
that's
everybody.
David. And before I give the introduction, I have to just ask you, because I'm curious. I love the background. What am I seeing in the background there? Your studio looks a lot better than mine.
Yeah. Well, actually, this is the more organized part of my studio. What's below the camera lens is the bags and piles and all the things, works in progress. But I have a lot of my family photos up there on the top shelf, along with mementos from trips. And then right over there is a stack of my journals that go all the way back to my teen years, and some things that I've picked up along my journeys there. I like that, as you can see back there over my shoulder, there's a mama playing cat's cradles with her baby. And I saw that in a museum shop in Shanghai. And I just had to pick that up and bring it back, because I work sometimes with cat's cradles and certainly work a lot with kids and string figures. And so it just, it's a favorite thing of mine there.
And by the way, let me,
all my children there too.
Let me just give you background, because I want to ask about something you just mentioned. Where she mentioned David Novak is artistic director of A Telling Experience. He enjoys telling stories to enrich discourse, entertain imagination, engage emotion, and discover common ground. He has been described as a master of literary collage for his unique style of narrative combinations. And I should also mention that David is an internationally touring storyteller and veteran of the National Storytelling Festival. He keynotes for numerous library and educational conferences, including the Sydney International Storytelling Conference, Czech Children's Theatre Festival, and American Alliance for Theatre and Education. He is recipient of the Circle of Excellence Award from the National Storytelling Network. And David, before we get into a little bit some of the stuff you've done, you just mentioned before that those are your journals behind you. Is that something you've always done all your life, or when did you start writing journals and saving them?
Well, I probably began in my last few years of high school, I suppose, when I was about probably 15, I guess. Yeah. So it's been a while. Yeah.
And
it's been a number of years.
I find that fascinating. Talk to me about when you journal. What are you doing?
Well, for a while there, and people will give me some lovely, leather-bound journals and that sort of thing. And I would feel like, oh my gosh, I can't write in this unless I have something that's really precious, And so I stopped trying to fill lovely journals and just started picking up comp books, because I realized that a journal is more like, it's like a pocket. A good pocket will hold anything, your keys, your receipts, your gum wrappers. And so in my journals, I put, I'll put my grocery list if I need something to write on. And then the random thoughts that come to me, and a few of my punch list of things I need to take care of, people I have to call, books I want to look up, movies I maybe want to watch. So I try to use it like more like a pocket, and that way I end up doing more writing and make more use of them. And I don't really know exactly. I mean, I do occasionally, use them more immediate for turnaround. I'm sketching out a story or some project that I'm working on, or I'm trying to design some craft that I'm trying to invent. But the real value in the journal is looking back at something that I wrote 10 years ago and surprising myself at what it was and what I was thinking at the time, because I don't always appreciate the thought maybe at the time that I'm writing it the way I do when I look back on it later. So yeah, it's just a part of the constant simmering of thoughts and ideas and dialogue with myself.
Now, is this something you do every day?
I try to, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you do it like every morning or for an hour or two in the morning, or when do you do it?
Usually, yeah, I'll make some notes for myself in the morning, and when I'm reading a book, I will often have it beside me so that I can, instead of, I'll grab a quote and I'll note the page on which I found it or something that I want to remember.
Because
So
my
it's
problem,
very helpful for that.
I'm loving the idea, but my problem is it's real, and it is a problem. I can't read my writing anymore.
Yes.
So I literally have to type everything. Some people are, I don't know, have you ever done that? Could you use an iPad or could use some other thing to journal with?
Well, there was a period of time when I did do more digital journaling,
Right,
and all of those journals are on floppy disks,
right.
right? So it's really, a vulnerability rather than an asset or a help.
Yeah,
I went back to paper and pen.
I hear the commercials all the time. They'll take your other stuff and convert it.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But I've never done that either. Talk then about your storytelling. So when did you start actually telling stories?
Probably when I first had to explain why it wasn't my fault. Yeah.
That was the first story.
Yeah, yeah. Throughout, child, I'm the third of four children in my family, and my older brother had what might be considered a slightly more traditional boyhood, in that he engaged in Little League baseball and in athletics and also band at the school. And I was the wild child, and mom didn't know what to do with me, so she signed me up for theater classes at an early age. And from age 7, that's where I went after school, and that's where I learned how to walk and talk. Quite frankly, that's what they teach you in the theater, and how to pretend to be a human being. Which until fake it till you make it. I'm still sometimes have to fake it, but I've learned a lot from that experience. But that engaged me right away with telling stories, which is what theater is. So that became my initial primordial soup. But I went off to study, and so I went off to study theater arts in general. I was interested in not only acting but playwriting, designing, directing, stage management, choreography of different kinds, and all of those interests. I pursued pantomime and clowning, juggling, a lot of circus skills, a lot of solo performance work, which got me tips when I was in college. I would do busking on the street corner and that sort of thing. And then along came this opportunity as I was working as a guest artist with a theater company in St. Louis in the late 70s, and working always with children's theater, because I grew up in children's theater and I ended up as an adult working with young audiences and family audiences. And the opportunity presented itself to start telling stories. And I suddenly had this epiphany. I discovered that it became an intersection of all my interests up to that point. So rather than being siloed as a playwright or an actor or a director, here I was writing, directing, designing, and performing my own stories, and that became just a total surprise. It wasn't something I set out to do, and I think that's always a good sign. Buckminster Fuller used to say, I often find out where I should be going by setting off for somewhere else. And that was my epiphany. Then I still didn't quite commit to it for a number of years. I went on to graduate school, and I tried formal studies, and I tried working in the entertainment business, with an agent and auditions and all of that sort of thing. But I kept finding more interest and opportunity to come in more informal spaces and simply tell stories, sometimes in the classroom, sometimes just in the cafe. And finally, I woke up and realized this is where my particular skill is leading me. So I finally committed to that in probably the mid to late 80s. Um, and so it's been my primary focus as an artist.
You remember your
Since then,
first?
yeah.
Do you remember your first paid gig as a storyteller?
Well, yeah, it was with the Theater Project Company in St. Louis. I was uh, telling. We composed at the time. We what we did was we composed storytelling shows. So at first, I was an actor acting like a storyteller, right? So we do a collection of stories that might suit some curriculum interest that a school might have. So like, let's say, American Tall Tales. So I'd pretend to be some kind of backcountry backwoods raconteur in my flannel shirt and my leather boots, and hi all, I'm a storyteller, going to tell you a story. And and around that time, the storytelling revival reached St. Louis, and we had the very first St. Louis Storytelling Festival at which I participated. And I began to hear other people coming from different various backgrounds, not all theater, library science, folk music, the religious backgrounds, the ministry, and that sort of thing. And I realized that there's a different quality there. It's not acting like a storyteller. It's being somebody who tells stories and having your own voice. And that became very appealing. And so as part of that, I'd already been working as an actor, acting like a storyteller, but it was through the St. Louis Storytelling Festival that I actually put away the false persona and just got up and said, here's this story. And I remember it was the story of the stonecutter, the Japanese circle story of the stonecutter, that I was probably the first story that I got up in front of an audience and just told it because I knew the story, not because I had in any way rehearsed it or scripted it or choreographed it or composed it. And I found myself having my own voice, and putting my own words to the story and connecting with my audience. And there's a veneer that comes between the performer and the audience, what we might call the aesthetic distance, right? That increases when I pretend to be somebody other than myself.
Is it nice?
Here I am, I'm talking to you,
yeah.
And it's me talking to you, right? I might tell you about, like I just did, how I acted like a storyteller. So there's acting within the stories while you tell it, but it's all part of the conversation that we're having, right? So
this discussion, David, reminds me of an idea I have. Nobody's picked it up yet, but I would love to do it, especially with storytellers. Everybody would recreate their very first story they ever told, So, like, for example, the story you told when you were telling a story, I assume there's not a videotape of that somewhere, or it's on a CD anywhere.
No.
Wouldn't that be cool that you could then have it, so you recreate it, then you could share it with the kids and you can share it with anybody else you want. So you get all these people telling their very first story. That's cool. You remember the very first one. Storytelling, let me ask you this. In some respects, it's different than acting, but the nice thing, though, per se, you don't have to memorize it. Is that correct?
Right. Memorization is a concept that we associate with, is a literary concept. We associate that with text. And I've always been good at conning text. I've never had difficulty memorizing a speech or dialogue in a play. That's always been a skill that I've had. But as I was embarking on understanding the distinction of storytelling from, say, acting, as I had understood it, and I want to say it as I had understood it, because really, I think it's fair to say that theater is a storytelling art form. And there are a variety of other storytelling art forms too, puppetry, for example. But when I thought about, let's say, one of the great epics like the Odyssey or the Iliad, attributed to the great storyteller Homer, who was, according to legend anyway, blind and pre-literate. There was no written language at the time, and later it took later generations to record and write down in this new form of writing the stories of Homer. So how did Homer memorize a story? Well, he didn't, because there wasn't a story to read and memorize. He didn't have to memorize. The challenge is, how do you remember? And that's a different thing. how do you remember your story rather than memorize it? You know a story. For example, I could ask you to tell me, I bet you could tell me the story of Little Red Riding Hood. Are you familiar with that story? You know
Very
that
good.
story,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So you could piece together, right? While we're talking, you could tell me that story. You wouldn't have memorized it. You just remember it. You know it, right?
Well,
And that's a very important distinction here.
well, let me ask you
Is
this then. In terms of you telling stories, do you write out your stories though?
was here. This was part of my transition from an actor acting like
Right.
a storyteller to being a storyteller, as it were, because I discovered that when I wrote out the story beforehand, and then I got up in front of people to tell what I'd written, that what I'd written didn't feel like the right way to tell it at that moment. I realized that you have to have a sensitivity to telling, to speaking in the context of your speaking. In other words, you have to sort of tell the right story at the right time for the right reason, and it may not be the way you imagine it when you wrote it down. So I reversed the process and I started writing my stories after I'd told them for a period of time, so that writing became an act of telling, just sort of like I said with my journals, talking to myself, right? So that there's this is one of the revelations I had in the process of the work that I do, is that storytelling is a conversational art form. And when you're in a conversation, even as we're having a conversation right now, I'm sharing with you um, anecdotes, pieces of my history, things that I've told people before. That's not all brand new. You know, I've shared these ideas in the past, so I kind of know sort of what I'm talking about. But the combinatorics of a conversation is when do those stories come into play? When do the anecdotes come up? When does something seem to suit the moment in a conversation? And so we're in a conversation. I'm doing, as we're doing in this interview, listening to your questions, trying to take a cue from you, and that often is the case with an audience when you're in a storytelling event. That said, there are structures and certain kinds of, I guess, design elements that come into play in a storytelling as a performance, in which, just like is happening right now, I'm doing most of the talking, you know, but you're still a part of this conversation. You're listening. You're maybe going to give a response at some point, and I'm going to respond to that. I was recently in a storytelling program that Tom Chalmers
Sure.
produces here in Asheville. And I don't know if you've had Tom
Yeah,
on
I
your
have a
podcast.
couple
I
of
wouldn't be
times.
surprised
Yeah,
if you had, though. Yeah,
sure.
right. Wonderful Asheville comedian, improviser, and storyteller in his own right. And he has a series that you may be familiar with called Listen to This.
Right.
And he puts out a call to, I'm on his mailing list, you know, here's the theme that's coming up in a month. Have you got a story to throw in with it? And so I recently participated at the Story Parlor here in West Asheville in his most recent iteration of that series, using the prompt, Blame It on the Rain. And so I was in a lineup with other storytellers. So we all had kind of been thinking beforehand about what it is we were going to share. And some of them were scripted, I have to say. Some of them were writers reading their stories. I tried to think through the memory that I wanted to share as part of that theme and think of something that fit the evening. And so there's a certain amount of design that goes into a performance like that, but that's not necessarily the case with every storytelling performance.
I haven't seen it yet, David, and I'll try to think of the name as we speak about it. But one local person is now doing tall tales. He has people tell intentionally tall tale stories, you know, and that's a whole different kind of storytelling. Are you familiar with that at all?
Sure. Well, it's a popular genre,
Right.
what is sometimes referred to as a liar's contest.
Right. Yeah, that's it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And one
Have
of the
you ever?
most popular in that storytellers in that genre would be somebody like Bill Lepp, who's commonly featured at the National Storytelling Festival, just because that kind of storytelling is very popular, you know,
Have you ever
with that
done that?
audience, and he's quite good at it.
Have you ever done it?
Well, not intentionally. I've never really participated in a liar's contest, partly because I don't like being in competitive performance. I'm not a competitive performer. I don't like being asked to speak in order to win, if you will, the story slam or the story contest, as it were. But I will say that just about any story you tell about yourself is going to be, on some degree, confabulation.
Right.
It's a autobiographical fiction is what that is. Because you're picking and choosing the bits of your life experience that are most relevant to the conversation, and leaving out certain details. So but I mean, I do have stories that I like to tell, especially that kind of stretch the truth, right, and that are surprising. And there's a wonderful opportunity to start with the truth. If you're going to tell a really good tall tale, you want to start with the truth, and then you start stretching it and stretching it and stretching it, and before it's before long, the audience kind of goes, oh, wait a minute, this isn't real. But the trick to that genre of storytelling is to keep it as real as possible, as long as possible, so that by the time you're deep into the fiction, it's too late. It's too late to dismiss the story. You can't give up anymore. Now you have to find out what's going to happen next. So,
what's your favorite type of story to tell?
Gee, that's a tough one. I really like being eclectic. I mean, this idea of when you introduced me of literary collage and combinatorics, I do like playing a little bit with language and with ideas. But there are so many different audiences. So I like being creative. I like being idiosyncratic. And I like playing with different genre. I do like folk tales. I do like stories for young audiences in the classroom and that sort of thing. But I enjoy exploring maybe perhaps more poetic or epic types of stories. A few years ago at the North Carolina Stage Company, for example, I did a series of performances and included the Epic of Gilgamesh, which took me about 2 hours to tell. I really enjoyed doing that, and especially because, again, it wasn't an actor acting like a storyteller. It was me really trying to know the story and have a grasp on it and be able to try to line it out for my audience using a variety of styles at different turnings in the tale. I realize I haven't answered your question because I'm trying to dodge it, frankly. I'm not a big fan of the personal story slam, moth style storytelling, because I think there's so much more to our stories than what we consider to be something of a journalistic true story. I think, and I don't always like the shackles of being required to fit into a time limit of having to tell my story for only 7 minutes.
It's funny you mention that, because I may have told you, or my producer may have told you, but that's one of the reasons I love the podcast, because I'm not tied into 28-minute segments. You had to end at a certain time. It's tough. How many? Let me ask you this: if ballpark, how many stories do you know?
I don't really have a working count. Hundreds. I mean, we all know hundreds. We are all a living body of text. And going back to Tom Chalmers, for example, one of the things I do like about participating when I'm able to in his series is that his prompts do bring to mind stories that are part of my body of text, but I've never taken a time to identify, recognize, and bring forward. So one of the challenges I realized that I've taught to as an adjunct instructor at East Tennessee State University, which I did for many years in their graduate program in storytelling, was to work at the problem of what is the storyteller's mind. And one of the challenges that a storyteller has, and this goes all the way back to Homer, is how do I know what I know? How do I bring to mind the stories that I already carry in me? And if you think of yourself as a living body of text, Blaine. You know the stories of the things that have happened to you. Those are your personal stories, right? But you've been absorbing stories all your lives, the stories your parents told you, the stories your friends, the anecdotes you receive from your friends, the books that you've read, the movies you've seen. All of those go into what you know, and they come into play often when you're prompted to think of them. So
Now,
if
you
I tell
mentioned
you about a time that I'm on the beach as a kid growing up by the ocean, and I see a fiddler crab and I grab it and the crab bites me. Maybe that brings to mind for you a time that of something you did as a child out in the wilderness, and maybe a mistake that you made, or a time that you had a surprise encounter with nature. But maybe, and perhaps that story comes to mind because of the story I told you. And maybe it's a fond memory, but I doubt, but it's probably also a memory that you would not have had independently on your own, maybe brought to mind.
well,
We
you're giving me an idea here, and it's kind of interesting hearing this. So in terms of people telling stories, one way to get into that tell stories is to give them prompts, in terms of, is that a good way to start wanting to be able to tell a story, work off a prompt?
Well, it can be. I mean, if you're just trying to draw the story out of somebody who's reluctant to share themselves with you, then stories attract stories, right? So the first thing to do is to share some kind of a story about yourself. If you want to hear, you're with your aging parent, for example, your mother or your father, and you're saying, you can come to them directly and say, tell me about what you did as a kid. But you can also tell them about how you got in trouble at school for making a mess with the markers and inking up one of the desks, and then had to stay after. And as an adult, I have that story, I have that memory, share that with my parent, with my mother, and I'll hear from her the naughty thing that she did and got in trouble for, right? Because it'll bring it to mind.
It's so funny you mentioning this, because just the other night we were with friends, and we doing exactly what you were saying. We were at dinner, lovely dinner, and we just started talking about experience stories from college,
Yeah.
and it was amazing the stories that were coming out, but we hadn't thought about it, just kind of prompt. What about something else you said, though, David? You were mentioning with aging parents. I was always not upset with my father, but maybe wanted to hear more of his stories, and he
Yeah.
had some great stories, but he didn't tell them, or some people don't tell them, or especially with my dad, he never talked about his war experiences, which I wanted to know about. But I don't know if you've heard that. A lot of people in the war don't want to talk about those experiences.
I have the exactly same
Oh,
experience that
really?
you had, with my dad. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he never shared that. That became so, compartmentalized and locked away that I wasn't going to open up that
What, the war
box.
experience?
Right. Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
even
But
his
we
other.
could talk together about the Iliad, because he had originally been a classics scholar, So we did find some common ground in story, but and maybe that was his indirect way, because of course the Iliad is a war story, indirect way of talking about a war experience. I don't know. Yeah, it's hard to say.
Indirectly, you're giving some great advice, I think, to listeners, because that's something else we try to do. We just had a very good friend who had dementia, and unfortunately just passed a couple of days ago. But one of the things I love doing with him, and I love doing it with my parents as well, is ask them to tell me stories of their childhood, and it's amazing they can remember those stories, or sometimes, but they can't remember other stories. What a great way to get older folks to talk, by asking, instead of thinking out loud, the proverbial, well, how are you doing today, and
Yeah, right.
that
Yeah, yeah.
goes nowhere. How can you get somebody to start telling a story? If you want to, your folks or grandparents or something, you want to find out more about them, is there a way you can get them to talking?
Well, yes. I mean, certainly one strategy is to tell a story to get a story.
Oh, interesting.
Tell about something that happened, right? Or something you've read in the news. But you can also ask questions, especially, you asked me about my background here, for example.
Right.
And I was telling you about the picture there on the wall, and there's a story about that, and it's related to traveling in China and also telling stories and playing with cat's cradles figures and also playing with children. So there's a whole series of lines of memory that would come out of maybe one simple object. So showing an interest in being curious about your environment, it can be a good way to draw the stories out of the reluctant storyteller as well, right? As another strategy.
You
And
mentioned,
actually, I use this is again talking about the challenge for the storytelling mind. How do I bring to mind my own choices, my own stories? And oftentimes, if I'm visiting frequently, I might go to a school to do a program for students there. But rather than doing a pat prefabricated program, I'll go to the school and I'll ask, what's going on at school these days? What's everybody studying? It's what, I think about what time of year it is. Here comes the winter holiday. What plans do you have for that? Or I'll look around on the walls and I'll, what's the name of your school mascot? What are your school colors? Any of these kinds of things will inform my choices because I'm looking for my cue, right? I'm looking for my prompt, so that I can now speak to an audience about something that has relevance to what's going on there already. So
again, you're kind of giving good advice to folks if they're listening, because I think about when my daughter was younger, and instead of the proverbial, well, how was school today, is also another question that doesn't go anywhere, but to get them to tell you something specific, I guess that's maybe the key to what you're saying, to try to hone in on something they could talk about other than a yes or no answer,
yeah.
And that's cool. How about, David, you mentioned also you taught, and you taught, I know, a good chunk of your life. Do you enjoy teaching?
Oh yes, yeah, quite a bit. Mom was a teacher. She taught science at junior and senior high school. It wasn't middle school in those days.
Right.
And I've never been a teacher full-time in the classroom. I've always been an itinerant teaching artist, coming into classrooms for short periods of times or working directly with teachers on how my skills might be useful for them in their work. And certainly, I really enjoyed working on a college level and a graduate level because students at those levels are there because they want to learn something. so it's a much more rewarding experience to have a learner who wants to learn from you.
Have you ever written down your stories in terms of a book or something that people can read them?
Yes, I have quite a few of them written down, and as I'm getting older, more of an intention to collect my stories in a legacy kind of way. But I have had stories in print. They're out of print now, but and it's a different medium. So the spoken story it does have to become translated if it's going to show up in print into the printed story. I mean, and for example, with a young listener, I can tell a story that's more complicated linguistically than that child could read on their own, right? And this is a mistake that often happens with people who are telling stories to children, even whether they're reading aloud or just telling the story out loud to children, is that they mistake their reading comprehension level with their language level. You can have a great conversation with a 5-year-old, and yet you look at the kind of books that they're capable of reading, and it's a much more diminished vocabulary and a much more elemental form of sentence structure, right? That child can speak at a much more sophisticated level than they can read, and we make a mistake if we think that if we tried to speak to a child at their reading level, rather than their speaking level or their listening level, because so it's, I generally think, as a general rule of thumb for myself, I'd rather overestimate the intelligence of my listener than underestimate it.
Now, with your storytelling, I know you've told stories all throughout the United States, but throughout the world. Any particular location that strikes your fancy in terms of kind of an unusual place you told a story at, or a favorite place you told a story at?
Well, the Glen Eden School in Sydney, New South Wales, is a Steiner school, what in the States would be considered a Waldorf school.
Okay.
But and I loved it because their whole curriculum is story based. So when I came in to tell them stories, they just they gave me they listened in such a way that it drew much more of an enjoyable experience out of me. I didn't have to manage their attention the way I might have to with another audience. Part of speaking to any audience is going to be exercising their attention, earning their attention, managing it, creating expectations, and then filling it. So yeah, I know I had a wonderful experience when I was able to go out there and really sink my teeth into the story. I remember I told the story of Hansel and Gretel, and we got to discover that story together. And that was really just a very rewarding experience.
Did you ever speak in a country where somebody had to translate your story?
Yes, I have had translators. I was in the Czech Republic for their Children's Theater Festival, and I was their guest lecturer, and I did have a translator working with me, and that was a lot of fun. But so my performance then had to rely on other nonverbal
I was thinking,
elements of my storytelling, much more my histrionics, my tone of voice, my pantomime, my use of materials, all which reinforced my meaning, my linguistic meaning. And that was a great exercise. I had a similar experience in France, in Lyon. I had a chance to tell a story in a classroom and I was using string figures. So that helped to illustrate the story while I was telling it, but I also had the classroom teacher translating for me as we went along, And I would pepper my story here and there with little bits of French or Czech,
right.
That I had learned, to help kind of keep it, keep my listener connected with me. Yeah.
If somebody wants to keep track of David Novak in terms of what you're doing presently or in the future, what's the best way to track you down?
Through my website, probably is the best way, is atellingexperience.com. So I also have A Telling Experience as my Facebook page. They can find me on Facebook. I don't really participate a lot in TikTok or Instagram or Twitter. I just don't find it very rewarding or compelling. But I'm available, online.
Is any of your stuff on YouTube?
Yes, I do have a YouTube channel. Okay. And you'll find A Telling Experience on YouTube, and you'll find David Novak's Tales. Also, I have two channels. One is stories that are identified as being inclusive of children. And the other is stories that are not inclusive of children, because not all stories are for children. Right. So, yeah. So and links to those, my YouTube channel, are on my website, atellingexperience.com. And so one can simply start there and go in a number of directions and learn more about my work. Yeah.
So if somebody wants to read more about David Novak or see more about David Novak, check any of those sites. Thank you, David, for being my guest on this Blaine's World podcast. It's a real honor for me to finally get you on board. And I also like my producer, Cappy Tassetti, and we'll hope to see you all sometime in the near future. David, thank you.
You're most welcome. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, Blaine.
Okay, just stay with me. I'm going to say goodbye, and then I'll sign off and we can wrap up. Thanks, man.
Okay.